Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the second last session of the final day of Women in Cybersecurity 2021 Beyond Borders. This conference has got us to think beyond what we and step into the unknown. It's got us to go beyond borders of restriction, barriers of access. It's got us to go beyond simply calling things out, going into calling people in to cybersecurity. Diversity perspective, an inclusivity perspective, and an equity perspective. That's why the hashtag #WeAreCyber has taken off the way it has over the last 1 year. Because this conference, in its second rendition, is now not only breaking barriers, but also creating new opportunities, also realizing opportunities in cybersecurity where we previously didn't think it. Me, for example, when I did a session on cybercrime in Africa and I was joined by individuals from South Africa, we started talking about the application of cybersecurity in sport. Areas that we typically didn't see as domains of cybersecurity have now opened up. So thank you to the amazing board behind both Canadian Women in Cybersecurity as well as Women in Cybersecurity Beyond Borders. Thank you to the team at CyberX and Cyber Exchange for making this happen. And importantly, thank you to all of the viewers and audience that have joined this platform to attend this conference for what has been a series of 9 days of riveting exchange. We currently have over 100 people on, and I'm looking forward to engaging on a topic that is surely going to get you thinking about how we use the intelligence that we gather for cybersecurity. I teach at Durham College. Many of you know me, Ali. I run both the AI Hub and the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. And when I talk to my students, especially when I talk to them from a programming perspective, I always remind them about security and sharing items around intelligence. Especially with my programming students, where I tell them a good programmer will cross a one-way street looking both ways. I repeat, a good programmer crosses a one-way street looking both ways, simply because security is often not enough or is often too much until it's not enough. You constantly have to be asking questions around cybersecurity, constantly have to be keeping pace with the only constant in cybersecurity, which is change. But how do we share the intelligence that we have? And how do we build community around the threat intelligence feeds that numerous organizations, numerous groups, numerous individuals, and numerous countries are gathering about the cyber landscape? You've heard me say this before. Great people learn from their own mistakes, but the real geniuses learn from the mistakes of others. But how are we going to learn if we're not sharing? And in this session, we're going to be dissecting this topic of cyber threat intelligence sharing in complete depth. And I'm joined by 4 individuals who are in no need of an introduction and, dare I say, have actually introduced many of us to this concept of safe and active sharing when it comes to cybersecurity. So without further ado, let's hop into this session where I'm going to ask each of the individuals to introduce themselves, as always, with a little bit of a different flavor. We're going to start off first with Anne. Anne, can you introduce yourself, tell us what you do and where you're calling in from, and more importantly, why is a conference like Beyond Borders important to you? Anne.
Thanks so much, Ali. So delighted to be here. I'm Irish, based in Paris, France, and I work as a cybersecurity consultant at IBM Security. Now, my background is, I don't want to say atypical, it's, everybody is atypical almost in cybersecurity, but I came into security via the side door of financial services and cloud. And my background in the past has been around financial regulation and financial data sharing. So I have a background in open standards, and I've collaborated a lot with people in different countries around a shared objective, which is mutualizing learning, mutualizing resources to try and find a way of making sure that information in the financial realm is interoperable, consumable, available. And having collaborated with a lot of volunteer-based organizations, I've noticed that there is a real commitment when there's sort of a shared purpose towards a common goal, motivated by the common good. It's not a profit motivation, that there is a real possibility to drive change. Now, it can take time. Getting consensus can be a long-winded process, but I see a lot of parallels between volunteer-led organizations that are sometimes then supported by supranational initiatives. And I'm just wondering whether there's something we can do within our industry to learn from parallel type initiatives that exist elsewhere. Bearing in mind that they're not easy, even when they go well, they take time to get off the ground. But I think there's definitely something to be learned from, like you were saying, in terms of orchestrating motivation, orchestrating capability and learning, but the motivation is not solely profit driven. And I think there's something around that in our industry that we need to look at, that the cyber threat is such that it goes beyond a proprietary problem with proprietary solutions. We have transnational problems that require transnational orchestration. So the theme of the conference, Beyond Borders, I mean, it's got so many levels. You know, at IBM Security, we talk about the future of security being open and connected. And initially, I think when we coined that term, we were talking about it in terms of technology, but there's a real human aspect to it. We need people in organizations to be open, to be connected. And it happens one conversation at a time. Conferences like this are massively important because it harnesses lots of people who share motivation, who share expertise, but with adjacencies. And without conferences like this, those conversations, they probably happen, but not as quick. So it's a real catalyzer of connection. It's a real catalyzer of, okay, I didn't realize you were doing that. Oh, we should stay in touch. So it's a vehicle for accelerating things that might otherwise happen, but just making sure they happen quicker.
And thank you very much for that eloquent opening. And really importantly, you've brought so many crucial elements to this discussion. But the one that I want to work with and remind our audience is this aspect of people coming to the table. I think this piece, and I've said this before, that professionals will hack systems, but the real skilled individuals hack people. And you need to understand that people firewall piece, and coming together and sharing allows us all to play a role in bolstering that firewall, bolstering our perspectives around cybersecurity. And I'm really going to dive into that piece around how we approach threat intelligence and how we share intelligence and how our people biases and stereotypes might often affect that. So Anne, thank you for that brilliant introduction. From Paris, we're going to perhaps take the scenic route and go to Kazakhstan, where I'm going to ask Sultana to introduce herself. What is it that she does? And tell us from her perspective in Kazakhstan, what or why is this conference important to her? Saltanat?
Oh, hi, Ali, and thank you for having me here. It's very excited to be here. As Ali said, I'm from Kazakhstan, a Central Asian country. I work at Honeywell as a cybersecurity consultant. So I work in the international team. Cybersecurity at Honeywell is an independent line of business, which provides not only to the customers of Honeywell system, but it provides to the market as a whole. And it provides proprietary solutions to known OT issues such as continuous threat protection, ability to monitor emerging risks before they spell disaster, and so on. So in terms of Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan is considered as a developing country. So since I work in ICS field, it's very important for me to participate in this kind of conferences, because conference, like a woman in cybersecurity, it has wealth of information, and It helps me to grow and learn of new security issues and emerging cyber threats, and to meet with a powerful women and experts around the world. Also, I would like to emphasize that since I work in industrial control systems field, there are only few women out here. So the first thing that I encountered, I couldn't find women in my country who work in cybersecurity in ICS field. So that time, the first thing which came to my mind is to raise awareness to build a gender balance in cybersecurity field. Not because I think something is different about the woman, but that different people working in different kind of problems is better, and diversity in problem solving is must.
Absolutely. Sultanat, I really appreciate that mention and that emphasis on diversity. We often say, right, that stupidity really is when you're looking at the same problem through the same lens all the time. And we need to shatter that. We need to bring more people to the table. We need to bring diversity to the table. And more importantly, once we have diverse people at the table from a cybersecurity perspective, how are we supporting and empowering them? And I'm looking forward to getting into the depths of that discussion from a threat intelligence sharing perspective. So Sultanat, thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time to not just join the board, but also be on this panel. It is truly appreciated. From Kazakhstan, I'm going to take a flight. Perhaps there's a direct flight to India. And I'm going to land in some picturesque venue of India and meet with Vandana, where I'm now going to ask her to introduce herself. What does she do? And from her perspective, what does a conference like this mean to her? Vandana.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ali. And I echo N's and Sultanat's opinion. So, hi, everyone. I am Vandana. I am from India. And my association with cybersecurity happened to be just by serendipity. Like, I was not planning to be in cybersecurity. It just happened to me, wherein I was introduced to it during my first job, and I fell in love with it, and did not feel like leaving this field, because here we have so much to learn every day. We have so much to share. So till the time we don't share, we don't learn. That's what I've learned over this 16 years of journey. And one important aspect is that people say that we don't find role models, but during this conference, I could see that it's full of role models. Everywhere, at every panel, I could see so many role models where people can look up to, people can learn from. And here I am learning from the wonderful ladies, and going to be sharing the details about what I have learned in these years. And I am going to be learning the new practices from them, from the different areas they've been working on. The opportunity that I have got to connect with the global leaders, I think that's one important aspect that I have got from this conference. It is came together, or it has brought together people from India, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Paris, and where not. It's like we all are from different countries, different parts of the geography, and we all are working together, sharing the information. What best can be there? I think this is the best thing that I can get from this conference.
Absolutely. And I think I echo those sentiments as well. And it's not just been about one-off conferences or one-off boards. These connections have allowed us to stay together, especially with our audience as well, and build partnerships and friendships. And as I've said before, right, when we come together, that's a start. When we progressing together, that's a good next step. But when we are working together, that's truly success. And that's a testament to how wonderful this conference has been, because all of us have found some ways to work together. And Vandana, I'm looking forward to further discussions with you, especially as we look at intelligence sharing from where you are on the global map. So Vandana, thank you for that. And now all wonderful trips must come to an end, and I will take a flight to Toronto, where spring has apparently come early, and we're smiling because we don't see any more snow in the horizon, but you can never tell with our nation. Victoria, please, this is not your first time on the Cyber Exchange platform. Introduce yourself. What is it that you do, and why is a conference like this particularly important to you, Victoria?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ali, and thank you for having me on. This is such an exciting opportunity. I'll start backwards. I'll start with why this conference is so interesting and exciting to be on. Where else would I be on a panel which represents people tuning in from 4 different countries? This is amazing. It's such a great feeling, and not only that, but to have women in cybersecurity from the different countries. It is definitely a powerful thing to have such a not only have women in cybersecurity the conference in Canada that CyberX did in the past week, but also expanding it beyond borders is just such a fantastic feeling. And like I'm going to echo a bit what Vandana just said, is that we so much to learn from each other, and there's so many different perspectives that we all bring, not just because we're women from different cultures, but also from the different companies and organizations that we're part of. Anyway, I'll let my enthusiasm sit at that, and then I'll introduce a little bit about myself. I'm president of ICT Square Toronto chapter. It's a community organization. It's a chapter of ICT Squared, which is the US-based global organization that does certifications such as the CISSP and etc. I won't go too much into depth in that. In my day job, I am in cybersecurity incident management at a financial institution, and I'm also on a part-time basis an instructor in cybersecurity at York University here in Toronto. Yeah, definitely excited to be here and learn much more about intelligence sharing than from these wonderful panelists as well.
Absolutely, and I think with folks like you and everybody on this panel, it's about intelligence sharing, but doing it intelligently. And those are very interesting concepts that we're going to dive into. I've actually already got 2 questions that have come in, so hats off to the audience for jumping right into this. I will come into your questions perhaps in the next 20 minutes. But Anne, with your permission, I'm going to start off with you by setting a little bit of context. You know, I've often said this, and I say this when I do cybersecurity awareness trainings as well, is that what happens in Vegas ends up on YouTube. Case in point, everybody's watching. Something is happening somewhere, and things get recorded. There is a trace of things that are happening. But for the sake of our audience, can you help them understand, when you look at cyber intelligence, what do you define as cyber intelligence? And what does it look like when you receive it? Is cyber intelligence something like, hey, phone call, something's happening? Or is it the way in which we present data, and is it open to interpretation? And we'll give you the floor to start off.
So I'm just trying to think the best way of approaching it. What I have noticed is that there is a lot of anxiety around cybersecurity, people feeling very vulnerable in their professional positions and also in their personal capacity. And when anxiety drives decision-making, it doesn't drive great decision-making. So what I have observed is that where there are companies who have budget available, there may be a tendency that they can buy their way out of the problem. And what I mean by that is that they will find a budget and they will start buying commercial threat intelligence feeds. And they will have a false sense of security. Well, we're spending money, we're augmenting our tool stack, we've got more kit, we're necessarily better protected. And where the more sort of progressive thinkers in terms of intelligence is when they realize, no, you can't buy your way out of this. You're going to have to think, and you can't sidestep that part. The real value is having a very honest conversation within the organization about, okay, what resources have we got? What are our threats that matter? What are our most critical assets? What are our most critical systems? If what goes down, is it going to put us on our knees? And then evaluating, okay, we know ourselves. It's kind of like the art of war, right? You know thyself. And what do we need to know about ourselves? And then consuming the most relevant intelligence feeds. Now they can be commercial, but it could be OSINT, right? Again, you don't have to necessarily go and spend a lot of money. And some of the smartest initiatives I've seen are anchored in a mindset of what can we do with what we've got, and with a little bit more of investment, what can we augment it with? And it's a question of then being smart, and I've seen it actually more since COVID. There seems to be much more of an inclination to be economical with resources and smart in how we use what we've got. And it's kind of good husbandry in the sense that I've seen people doing it in their personal capacity, but also in the corporate sphere, focusing more on what really matters. And the companies that are doing well across the board, not just in cybersecurity, are the ones that are being able to make better decisions about priorities. When everything is a priority, nothing is. So the ones that are able to decide what really matters, what do we need to protect, and what do we need to know more that we don't know right now to be able to drive insight, visibility across then detection, response, etc. So there are different layers of it in terms of intelligence, and it goes from the commercial feeds that you buy to what do you already know within your organization. There could be loads of intelligence about what your users are doing, about shadow IT, between what you think you've got active in your network and what you really have active in your network. So it's a question of a mindset of being humble. And I think a lot of it is that mindset of being willing to entertain the idea that we are vulnerable. And once we start trying to uncover the reality, accepting that it might be ugly, but it's better that we know. So a real mindset of acknowledging how things are as the baseline and being willing then to make sometimes tough decisions and arbitrations about what we do next.
Fantastic. And I think that note that you made, or rather the whole detail that you provided, I think for our audience also, it really brings home the point that cybersecurity, threat intelligence, but just cybersecurity in general is about much more than just IT alone. It is a team effort. There are multiple people at the party when it comes to beginning to understand these intelligence feeds that we have. With that particular bridge of thought, I'm going to make a journey back to Sultanat. And Sultanat, I want to work on what Anne just told us and ask you is that when you're thinking about threat intelligence feeds and you're deciding whether to use something, something that's open source or to buy a commercial feed or to create your own, what are some of the things that you put on your checklist in terms of how you decide what is an accurate or decent enough feed for the organization? Sultanat, your perspective.
Thank you, Ali. Yeah, I would like to emphasize here that in cybersecurity, we don't have a competitors. So we need to have each other's back. So companies need to work together in order to get stronger with each attack. So in other words, the more attackers attack, we are defenders get more stronger through intelligence sharing. So in this fast changing digital landscape, companies cannot alone be an island and sustainably address and identify all the cyber threats. So cyber intelligence sharing, it allows us to build each other defenses as opposed to be an island, as I said before. Here I would like to say that the intelligence sharing is critical for empowering the global ecosystem to move from individual to collective resilience. So whether it's voluntary shared, whether it's ad hoc shared, whether it's mandatory shared, but we all companies need to work together in order to be more resilient. Since, cybersecurity is changing and it's never ending cyber threats.
Absolutely. And, when you said that, I remember quite recently when I was involved in just helping an organization with putting a few of their feeds together and just thinking through where they're getting their information from. One of the things that I emphasized to the board was this aspect of, look, it's one thing to be smart, quite the other to be wise. And sometimes the smart thing to do is not the right thing to do. You need to be very wise. It may be smart to say we're getting in all of these threat intelligence feeds and yay, we got all these feeds. But you got to be wise with them and you got to know how to use them. And that's where I really want to dig into this point as we move forward in terms of how do these feeds, once we start using them, how do they feed into that international cosmos that we find ourselves in? So Saltanat and Anne, thank you for dissecting this topic really in depth. I'm going to go to Vandana and to Victoria, and then we'll start diving into the international composition of sharing. Vandana, working on what both Anne and Saltanat has just said, I want to ask you is that when you look at threat feeds, can you help our audience understand what is in a threat feed? Is it basically just syslogs telling you what's happening on your network? Is it feeds that also contribute aspects around social engineering? Can you help our audience understand what constitutes an ideal, healthy, holistic intelligence feed?
So if we talk about intelligence threat feeds, they can contain huge amount of information about adversaries, the tools they use, the tactic they use, and now it's the composition of exactly how the attack has been triggered, because it's very, very important. Like if I go back and talk about intelligence sharing, why are we sharing the information? Because we want to know that what are the adversaries which are trying to attack any nation, any organization, any industry. Like there are attacks which are happening especially on healthcare, especially on automobile, especially on oil sector. So when we are trying to understand those industries, those attack vectors, so those threat advisories are composition of all such things, wherein it defines that which industry it's targeting, or whether it's a generic one. Like if I talk about WannaCry, when it broke, it started with the like just one place, but it spread the across countries. Like it just not spare anyone. Similarly, there are many attacks that have happened not just on one country or one unit, but it just spread across. Similarly, these advisory concentrate on the kind of tactics the attackers might have used, the tools they might have used, so that it can be defined. This attack only catered to brute forcing, or they were trying to capture passwords, or they were trying to act as a ransomware. So what kind of attack vectors they were trying to use. So majorly what I have seen from all the different advisories that we get, it's about who, what, when, where, how they have done. And that's how I have seen the Maitreyi framework. Like that talks about all of that, categorizes it, how much critical that will be. And if something happens to any of the servers, how much impact would be. If something happens to an application, how much impact would be there. Or if an organization gets breached, how soon they have detected it. So all of those things. And when we share about certain organization, it actually helps other organizations getting more mature. Like I have seen organizations taking these threat feeds and fine tuning their firewalls, their IDSs, IPS systems, their signatures, so that this thing has happened to someone, but should not happen to them. And there is one point which you rightly said: when you're getting all these feeds, don't think that you are wiser. You've got yourself secured. No, you are not. You've just seen somebody else and you're trying to make sure those things doesn't happen to you. But there might be something else. Like attackers are becoming like maybe 10 times wiser than us sometimes. Like organizations are spending more and more money every year. Still, things are getting breached, organizations are getting breached, and attacks are happening. So I think we have to play around with the best that we have and understand where we are lacking so that we can make it mature over the years.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with that maturity model, and that consistently lowering the risk. You're not eliminating it, you're maturing as the time goes along. But I also really enjoyed the emphasis on the piece of that when you look at data, when you look at threat intelligence feeds, it is a matter of interpretations. And I've said this before, if you've watched my power hours, where I say, you know what, computers are useless because they only give you answers. You need to ask questions of that data that's there so that you can proactively plan. And we're going to come to that very shortly in terms of the questions we can ask the feeds that we're getting. So Vandana, as always, thank you very much. And now I'm going to go to Victoria. And Victoria, one of the things that you've excelled in is training people today for the skills required for tomorrow. You've been very proactively looking at how you can enhance IC Squared offerings, how you can get more folks into it. Can you tell us a little bit about the skill sets that are required at the table when you are consuming threat intelligence feeds and when you're working with these feeds? Can you give us some perspective, Victoria?
Well, thank you very much for the kind words as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the initiatives that we would do with the ICT Square Toronto chapter. So although our IC Squared itself does the certifications and those offerings and formal training, our chapter here does more, we offer professional education opportunities. So we create events like these ones, and we bring on our different experts to talk about their fields and encourage a safe space of information sharing. So that's one of the big, especially now that we've gone to work from home, and then the landscape has shifted a bit. We want to make sure that people still feel safe sharing the information that they know, and that that we provide that platform to them. And for sure, there's and I'm sure we're going to dive into a bit more about challenges of information sharing later on. But one of the big aspects that I strive for is providing that safe space. Actually answering your question, Ellie, about the different skills that are needed. Definitely curiosity, but also the ability to contextualize the information that you are receiving, because not every environment is the same. So one piece of data will mean different things to different people. So being able to then bring back that data to your environment, your organization, and knowing how to apply and communicate. So having the ability to contextualize and communicate, I would say, are the biggest skills to have in order to make good use of the information that you receive and you learn about.
Absolutely. And I think in the introduction as well, many folks, when they introduce themselves, not just in this panel, but other ones as well, when you're talking about diversity in cybersecurity, often talked about cybersecurity wasn't necessarily what they had trained for. But critical thinking, those skills to ask questions, was something that they garnered in other fields of work and brought that to the cybersecurity table. So to our audience, I really hope that not only you've been able to understand what do we mean by threat intelligence feeds, but also how do you need to interact with it, because it's not a passive engagement. I also will add, to those who are watching on cyberexchange.ca and are enjoying the wonderful transmission, you'll notice that while we're speaking, there's some interesting points going at the bottom there. Those are some interesting points that you can look at, some interesting links as well. And on the cyberexchange.ca platform, you can reach out to our panelists, but you can also reach out to other individuals and other companies and take a look at some of their feeds and how they've positioned things for the marketplace. Now, I want to dive a little bit more based on the first set of responses that we've got on this element of sharing and how that impacts the spaces that we're in and how that impacts how we engage with intelligence feeds. You know, everyone knows this, that the growth of attacks is extremely large. For example, I remember reading something to the effect of just yesterday that in 2020 alone, approximately 144 million different types of malware were available, right? And that number is expected to quadruple going into 2021 and beyond. And the cost of cyber attacks itself are in the trillions. The importance here is to understand how we share. Typically, you'll see peer-to-peer networks that organizations have set up. But now, as we've realized, we take the local global and we globalize in all of our economies, you have to start sharing across borders as well. So Anne, I want to start off with you just a little bit. When it comes to sharing threat intelligence feeds, it isn't as simple as here's an email and here you go. Can you talk to us about what does sharing constitute and how are organizations across the world, IBM as an example, sharing with different think tanks globally? Anne?
So IBM as a corporation, like any corporation, we have the profit motive. Okay, we have shareholders and we have quarterly reporting, etc. So we have a business where we monetize threat intelligence, and it's sort of monetized under the brand X-Force, and that's a very significant group of people with very deep subject matter expertise. We're not alone in that space, and it's one of the things that I won't say it's a problem in our industry, but it is a reality. That is, there is a real financial motivation and incentive for information to be proprietary. And I'm not casting judgment on it. It's just a reality. But it's something that, it's one of the aspects, I think, of capitalism in the widest sense is to what extent do we consider that the invisible hand in the market serves the common good? And there is a reality which the invisible hand sometimes feeds the highest paying master. And yet, if we consider that cybersecurity, the impact of cyber attacks, Vandana mentioned healthcare, right? Impact on human life. To what extent can we say that it's no longer reasonable for the profit motive to be the dominant force in our industry? And there was a really interesting article that was published by a former member of the Israeli Defense Forces, talking about the need for the equivalent of a World Health Organization, but for cyber. So where you would have a supranational coalition of corporations and nation states coming together because there is an acknowledgement and a commitment that the nature of cyber attacks and cyber protection are such that a micro level response at the level of a corporation is not sufficient, that a nation state response within the borders of that nation is not sufficient, but that supranational cooperation, again, beyond borders, across borders, is absolutely the way forward. And when you look at, for example, how the World Health Organization functions, there are incentive mechanisms in place so that we're far from discouraging information sharing, we discourage hoarding. So in the case of a pandemic, in the case of viruses, right, and you can make the parallel between medical viruses and computer viruses, is that we need to find incentive mechanisms so that information sharing as opposed to hoarding becomes the norm, where we have a code of conduct, where we have behaviors that go from individual decision-making right up to governmental decision-making, where, you know, Charlie Munger, I don't know if you're familiar with the name, he's a very famous gentleman who works with Warren Buffett, and he has a phrase which is, when you're not thinking about incentives, you're not thinking. And in cybersecurity, I think we sometimes neglect the incentive mechanisms that are at force, so in force and at play, and they have a very real impact on what people do. You know, for example, SolarWinds, private sector company took the decision to go public. Well, there's no mechanism that makes that mandatory, you know, but we could just say that's good behavior. So how can we organize our industry collectively so that we can codify and incentivize good behavior? It doesn't mean killing the market for threat intelligence feeds, but it just means that there shouldn't be as much incentive to be the proprietary owner of information when actually sharing it would benefit everybody.
And thank you very much for that. I think, you've brought up so many important points there, especially on the incentivization piece. But I really like this aspect of that we have to think beyond borders, right? Our borders don't define us, our bonds do. And that's, that bond that we have for a safer, more intelligent, more secure environment to do business, to provide services and to live should really be incentivizing us to share. But how do we create that culture of sharing? Really important points there that you've brought up. And I thank you for bringing that up and really drawing that distinction between there are private sector feeds that you can buy, but there are other sources of information as well. And with that, I'm going to take one of the questions that's come in. And Sultanat, I'll bring that question to you and then go to Vandana and Victoria. And Sultanat, this is drawing also on what Anne said, is how can we make the intelligence that we have actionable? Who's responsible when you have certain intelligence feeds come in? What's that process looking like once you've got a feed? Who's responsible for what? Can you talk to us a little bit about that domain, Sultana?
In terms of intelligence feeds, so I'm from, as I said, from Kazakhstan, and we don't have a lot of threat intelligence platforms or information out here where we could get the information. So mostly we rely on international threat intelligence sharing, such as from US, CISA, or in Honeywell, every week we get the email of about the information. So when I think about this, I think mostly about the challenges about threat intelligence sharing among countries, such as, for example, if we would like to share information which is related to privacy or human rights protection, when we share information with other country which has a weak law or which has a history of violation of human rights protection, it makes very complicated. So I would like to hear more talk about the privacy of intelligence sharing, that with the GDPR, for example, information sharing is completely changed because most companies are fearful of breaching the GDPR. Also, most companies, when they share threat intelligence, they don't properly anonymize personal identifiable information, and they get liable for that. So what I would like to say that I just recently read a white paper from World Economic Forum, which says that we have to be very careful with intelligence sharing and apply new techniques such as encryption, computation, or differential privacy. So to make sure that there is no way to reverse engineer the real data. Or another example I could say from my experience, like, for example, network-based attacks happen, and there are information which are business critical, such as system name, domain names, or IPs. So here, what we did is we declassified the data and we shared out of public, so all the company are aware of this attack and they can make steps in order to protect.
Absolutely. And I think I really appreciate the fact that you brought up not just where we get our feeds from, how we act on it as organizations, but also starting to think about what's in those feeds and raising privacy as a major question. I think not only does this allow for our audience listening another perspective to question the feeds that they get, but also to realize how essential privacy is. Much like the oxygen that we breathe, it is an essential component and a right to some degree when we start to engage in sharing information about others. So Sultana, thank you for bringing that up. And I'm going to come back to that point a little bit later on as well. Go back to Vandana and then Victoria. And Vandana, again, a question that's come in, and I'll rephrase it just a little bit. I've said this before, that wars and fights can begin when you like, but they often don't end when you choose. And once you start down a particular path, especially on intelligence sharing, you've got to see it through. Vandana, can you talk to me a little bit more, based also on what Saltanat said, is what are some of the challenges that might emerge when different jurisdictions geographically may want to share intelligence or not with one another? Vandana?
Sure. So when it comes to the intelligence sharing, the challenges is first is different organizations, individuals, countries, if they are sharing intelligence in different forms, which may not be easily consumable by defenders, because defenders have to take an action upon them. So if that's not easily consumable, that's a very big challenge. And how much a shared intelligence is actionable? Let's say you've just got so much of data, but it's not at all actionable. It's not at all relevant to the organization, to the country, or to a community. So it's as good as not having it. So we have to have a consistency. We have to have a same format, so that when we get the intelligence, we don't have to do like, it should not be like a piece of jumbled puzzle, which you're trying to solve. So intelligence should be like consistent, and it should have some kind of consumable information, which is like the key to use any threat intelligence. Now, if I talk about from the product perspective, for example, when we get all these feeds, and I'm totally talking from the cybersecurity perspective, wherein we get a lot of feeds from different sources, different countries, different places, and we don't know which tool to use, where exactly we should apply it to, or we're getting so much of logs, but what to do with them, we have no clue. So it's as good as not having it.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do is understanding where exactly it can be used. Like Saltanat said, if it's for privacy, if it's for human rights, so it's not going to be sufficient in maybe other fields. Or if it's for healthcare, it might not be sufficient for some other field. So it's very important to understand where exactly it will be important, where exactly or which kind of sector it's targeting, which country it might be targeting, because we have seen that there are some intelligence which are especially coming for some countries, or maybe for some organizations. Like if I talk about IBM might be taking threat feeds, or might be giving threat feeds to some organizations. So they will be curating the threat feeds and giving. If they are not curating, that means the information that is going to the different sectors, that's not proper information, not the right threat or cybersecurity intelligence sharing. And actually that goes not just with cyber, but with anything and everything that we talk about. If the information which is needed is not right, it's as good as not having it, not using it, or not entertaining it.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. This emphasis on data and information. We've been doing, I remember at CISO Forum 2020, hosted by Cyber Exchange, there's this conversation, I believe IBM was talking about this, where they were talking about automation of threat intelligence feeds and using AI. And a statement was made where the individual said, there's no AI without IA. no artificial intelligence without information architecture. And you really need to know that architecture very, very well. So Vandana, thank you for bringing that up. And Victoria, a question has come in, which I am going to bring to you. And again, I'll reword it just a little bit because it ties on information architecture, but it also ties into sector-specific sharing. Now, Victoria, you mentioned, in your work in incident response at the bank, obviously you will be relying on feeds as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about sharing circles that exist, let's say, within the fintech sector or sector-specific intelligence sharing practices? Victoria.
So unfortunately, I don't work very close in that field, so I won't comment it from that perspective. What I can talk about is, of course, the community organization perspective, and one of the really important things across, I guess, and this is across industries, across communities, is the importance of building relationships and being able to partner with different organizations and seeing what synergies exist and build that trust. I mentioned earlier about how it is very uncomfortable in some cases to share information. You don't know if you're sharing too much. What if that information will go and hurt you, right? So it's very, very important to slowly but surely keep building that trust across industries, across communities and community organizations like ourselves, and keep sharing that information and demonstrating that that information won't be misused against the person who's going ahead and doing the good thing of sharing, for example, indicators of compromise, which can help another organization or company find an attack in their environment. It's such an amazing, wonderful thing, but it can be used to hurt as well. And we need to continually demonstrate that this information will not be used to hurt the sharer.
Absolutely. I think that commitment of trust and how we use some of that information and being transparent with that is also important. And I'm going to come back later on to Sultanat, Vandana, and yourself to talk a little bit more on that privacy element as well. Now, we have about 14 minutes left, and I know this discussion can go on and on. I see at least another 4 questions, and I'm going to do my best to stitch that into the conversation. And let's go back to you. I think this flow is working very well. So, Anne, let's start off with you. And this is an example that the individual has shared, and I want to get your perspective on it from a threat intelligence feed. So, how much power can governments or should governments have when it comes to requesting by force in some cases for information? The example that the individual has quoted is with WhatsApp and their new privacy rules. We know that those are specifically intended towards business sharing, etc. But can governments, for example, go to major conglomerates, WhatsApp and their big blue parent Facebook, and ask them or demand from them the logs, for example, of personal sharing between individuals? Can you give us some perspective on that, Anne?
So I'm going to state a disclaimer up front, which is I do have a bias towards strong institutions and an empowered public sector, which is maybe not something that a lot of people would say publicly, but I've worked a lot with public sector institutions like central banks. And what I've noticed is that the public sector is often much maligned. We complain about it. They're identified as being stuck in the dark ages, or that they're power hungry, but basically we never say anything very good about them. Now, what I have identified in the public sector is that you very often have people who are committed, again, to this term that I mentioned earlier, the common good, societal issues where they're trying to increase well-being. And it's something that drives people, and it's something actually that drives a lot of people in cybersecurity as well. This sort of noble quest to protect, to serve a cause greater than yourself. Now, with that as a preface, I would love to believe that we are served by public institutions that have the well-being and the common good at the forefront of their thinking. And were that always the case, I wouldn't have a problem with the public sector, governments, supranational organizations going to private corporations and asking them to hand over data, assuming that it is not used with an intent to harm, that it is used to protect, that it is used with the common good at the heart of the ask. That's a really big assumption in the world that we live in. The idealistic part of me would love to believe it. The realist in me knows that it's not always true. and that we live in times where there are some dark forces. So I know what I would love to be the case. I would love for it to be legitimate and safe for that kind of data to be requested and used to protect. I am cautious and a little bit pessimistic about enforcing backdoors into technology, because once the backdoor is there, it can be misused. Now, the flip side of that is, well, is it normal that private corporations wield so much power? These are macro issues, right? They're not specific to cybersecurity. This is about how our global economy functions. It's about where do we place the common good? The limits of capitalism, right? These are really, really big issues. But my personal view would be if, and it's a big if the request is done with proper governance, if it can be overseen, and if there is a way of verifying that it is not coercion, and that that we can protect against abuse, yes, I think that is a reasonable ask, but it comes with a whole bunch of caveats.
Well, the next time you run for president of the world, let me know. You've got my vote, because I'll tell you this much, is that you've definitely spoken truth to power there and made your biases upfront. And I will, for me listening to you speak and everybody on this panel, I know we've got quite a few individuals who are aspiring also to leadership roles in cybersecurity. I really appreciate the fact that you were upfront in stating this is my bias towards this and being very clear in your perspective, not holding on to one truth but multiple truths. So thank you, Anne, for that very thorough perspective and that question that I was a little unsure of if I could ask, but thank you for making it safe for me to ask that question as well. Sultanat, I want to come to you because you're very strong on the privacy and compliance piece, and I'll weave in the question into this, and perhaps you can talk to us from the perspective of the situation in Kazakhstan. And this is a question on the role of government in creating frameworks for sharing. In Kazakhstan, for example, is legislation allowing you to share? Is it promoting the sharing of information? Give us a little bit about the context where you're working within. Sultana?
Yeah, sure. In Kazakhstan, we do have legislation such as Data Protection Act. And of course, it is similar to GDPR that we are not allowed to share PII, personal identifiable information abroad, or store PII data in data centers, which is located abroad, of course. So what I would like to say that in Kazakhstan, when we speak about intelligence sharing must be done with respect to the privacy. So it should be designed with aim to protect in the highest degree the privacy. So it should not only in Kazakhstan, but in my just pure opinion, that intelligence sharing in respect to the privacy should be based upon an international accepted privacy policies. So mostly it is similar around the world. Another point, as Victoria mentioned before, about the trust still in Kazakhstan, the communities want to know with whom they share information, even if it's government. They would like to know that their information which they are sharing is handled appropriately. So the trust is a key for cyber intelligence sharing. Here, what I mean is we have to share intelligence, like best practices and knowledge, not the evidence, which is used usually in investigation or in a court. This is in terms of privacy. Yeah, I've said before that our government usually advises to use the best technology to anonymize the data, to obfuscate the data, to use encryption mechanisms in order to protect our citizens.
Absolutely. And I think, for our audience, this is one of the reasons why Beyond Borders has been particularly powerful, because you have to realize that cybersecurity doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens within context. And those government contexts that it happens within impacts the amount that we share, what we share, and how we share it as well. I've seen a lot of questions also come in around political motivations around sharing. And what I will say to the audience who have asked that question, that could be the subject for a separate discussion altogether. Today, this is the first time on the Cyber Exchange platform that we've started getting into this subject, and I promise you we will have another discussion on that. We have about 7 more minutes to go, and Vandana, a question for you, then Victoria, and then we'll come to a soft landing with some closing remarks. And Vandana, this is a question more on the technical side, and that is on the weight of threat intelligence, especially in companies that are multinational. How can we ensure that threat feeds are aggregated, not consuming too many resources? To put it another way, how can we smartly ensure that all of our threat feeds are presenting itself logically for decision making? Vandana?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Actually, what I have seen from my personal experience, that some of the teams that I've worked with, especially around cyber threat intelligence, what they do is they take the feeds from different sources, and they have a dashboard, so that there is a place where they store the data, but then there is a dashboard, which is a very lightweight dashboard, so that whenever they want to pull the information, they can actually view it. Whenever they want to understand that which area needs to be concentrated upon, they can just take a look at. So that's one good thing I feel that any organization can take a look at, wherein they can have a single dashboard where they can have different views. And another important aspect that I've seen is that we are human. And as a human, we like colorful things. We like things in a format of statistics. So if it's in the form of statistics, we know, okay, this is the area where we exactly would be concentrating upon. Because if it's too much of information, we'll be like, oh, I think it's going above my head, and we will not be able to action it. Similarly, you brought a point of AI. So that's how a threat intelligence can be actionable. And now people are talking about AI with cybersecurity, or IA with cybersecurity. Now, if we don't have AI and IA, it's not going to work, because it's just going to keep on coming in. Like, to give you a very naive example, like students, there are so much of information that keeps coming in. And after a point, they'll be like, no, I can't take it anymore, because I'll forget everything. Similarly, AI helps in curating this. And if you have a nice dashboard, which is just showing it to the analyst that, okay, this is the information you have to take action on, I think it's going to work, because any organization can pull in information from hell lot of sources. But if the analyst is not sure how to work on that, it's not going to be useful for that organization. And that actually goes for organization, countries, communities, and any other sector.
Couldn't have agreed with you more there. One of the things that I told our students once when I was working with them is, data, you got to be very careful who you give that data to as well. Because when you torture the data, I remember reading the saying, I think it goes, if you torture the data, it'll confess to anything. So whoever uses that data, you really have to be careful who's getting those feeds as well. Vandana, thank you so much for that perspective. Last question to Victoria, and then we'll come to some concluding remarks. Victoria, could you comment a little bit on insider threats? Do those at all factor into intelligence feeds, and could those impact the quality of our feeds as well, or how we act on feeds? Victoria, any perspective from you?
Oh, it's a great question. Insider risk is a whole field all in its own. Some companies have entire teams devoted to analyzing insider risk and knowing how to address it and categorize and prioritize certain types of insider risk. And in terms of where it comes from, relating to intelligence sharing, again, we put a lot of trust in our teams and in our teammates. The teams that are usually working with intelligence in a given company, with the cyber threat intelligence teams, they are hired for a particular purpose, with the skill sets that are necessary, and they grow the skill sets. And we definitely, in terms of, in my experience, there's no, I haven't seen a particular emphasis or a risk existing in this specific space. I find insider risk is more broad, and because of the different there's so many different ways that an insider can harm a company, but that's not one area that I've seen that be a particular concern. It definitely comes down to, hiring practices, hiring diverse teams, making sure you have the different skill sets that you need to create the information to make it useful for the teams, and basically trust that those teams deliver the information that is actionable and relevant to you at the time.
Absolutely, and that currency of trust, which truly is the nucleus of how we engage in the cybersecurity space, has to factor in to how we share intelligence feeds. Now, with that, we have come to the conclusion of our time. Firstly, I'm going to thank our panelists, Anne, Sultanat, Vandana, Victoria. Thank you so much for taking the time from all over the world to be on this session. I know that there were other topics that we could have easily gotten into, and I've also seen a lot of questions come in around political sharing of data, and even a couple of questions that have come in around how quickly we share intelligence feeds and what are the motivations around putting a fee around intelligence feeds. I also saw a question come in around whistleblowers, and I know exactly where that's coming from, and the role of hacktivists and the role of ethical hackers in feeding some of these feeds and incentivizations for society. A specific example that was actually brought up in the chat was when you have tip lines where people can call into. How does that factor into the world of the digital world that we find ourselves in? I've said this before that in 2 months, thanks to COVID, in 2 months we've seen 2 years worth of innovation, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot to be discussed and a lot we could have unpacked. But Anne, Victoria, Vandana, and Sultana, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to ask you to stay on so that we can just have some quick concluding remarks in the green room. But to our audience, thank you again for being such champions and joining this session as well. There were over 100 folks on this session, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time. Coming up next, we have a session moderated by the CEO of CyberX, Mahdi Raza. Well, he'll be talking about diversity as it applies to cyber education and perspectives from around the world. And I really hope that you pay attention to that session, because we're going to be engaging in some discussions around cybersecurity education in rural communities, cybersecurity engagements in communities that are only now coming into the digital ecosystem, and how the pandemic has impacted this education space. Stay tuned for the final session of Beyond Borders. If there's one thing that I learned from this session on intelligence sharing, is that I feel super intelligent. Rather, I am intelligent because I know nothing. I knew nothing when this session began, and our panelists have educated me on so much more. So thank you once again for joining. Thank you to our panelists, wherever you are in the world. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you in approximately 29 minutes and 38 seconds. Take care.